Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, as we approach the new year, it's the top 5 stories of the last year. We'll get to the new year in a subsequent show. Pennsylvania politics in depth and in detail, and guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. All right, Happy New Year to everybody. I want to thank our viewers around the state here in WGAL and South Central PA. I want to thank you for making us the second most watched Sunday morning commentary program, state or national. It's about you, the viewers. I want to thank the folks at JPL, wonderful folks who do the production. And of course, you, the viewers, again, for your consistent support of this program over 16 years. And naturally, I want to thank guests like the ones we have today, 3 of the state's top journalists sitting across from me. And I think I can say, as often is the case, John Micek with the Allentown Morning Call. I'll get that out. Amy Worden with the Philadelphia Inquirer. And to my right, that's figuratively speaking, Brad Bumsted. Your left. You got that, Brad?
I do, but it could be literal as well.
It could be literal. Right or left, we don't care. Brad Bumsted with the Trib-Review. Okay, here we go. Brad Bumsted, top 5 stories. Give us one of them.
No question in my mind that the conviction of Jerry Sandusky, the former revered coach at Penn State, convicted of child molestation, and the fallout from that is the top story of the year, not only in Pennsylvania, but it was a national and international story. And it's not just so much the conviction of this coach, but it was the subsequent report by Louis Freeh, former FBI director, then charges against former university president Graham Spanier, and now serious questions about how then Attorney General Tom Corbett, handled the whole matter.
Yeah, John, that certainly reverberated. I mean, I won't ask you, how many stories did you write? I'm going to ask you, you can't even probably tell me.
I couldn't even hazard a guess. It seemed like I was in state college more often than an undergraduate was for a couple of months there. But, I mean, you can't understate the importance of the story. I mean, so, you know, for a lot of people, Pennsylvania is Penn State, and with the sort of core values of the state and went to the identity of that part of, of that region as well. All these sort of embedded football weekend things, I mean, really shook to its core. And now political implications with the new Attorney General, Kathleen Kane, promising an investigation of the way now Governor Corbett handled that probe as well. Yeah,
Amy, actually, when we got into it, lots of concern about how long it took. We'll get to one of the top stories of the year in a moment, but no doubt about it, the NCAA penalties, a huge deal throughout the state. This story went on, and it's not over yet, right? We still have a trial of a couple of Penn State administrators coming up. What's your take?
Right. We still have the trial of the administrator, the former Vice President Schultz, and also the former athletic director Curley coming ahead. But I think we've also set the stage again, as John mentioned, with the election of the new Attorney General, who has said one of her top orders of business will be looking into how that investigation played out over the course of several years. I think we're far from hearing the end of this.
So go ahead.
Well, and an implication of all of that is that Kathleen Kane, by making this an issue and looking at how it was handled, and having said during the campaign that it was probably political in terms of how Corbett handled it, if I'm a defense attorney for Schultz, Curley, or Spanier, I'm looking at that pretty closely and figuring out a way to bring that up.
All right, I'll tell you what, guess what we'll do? We'll do big story of the year number 2, Kathleen Kane's election. It's a huge deal after these words. And we'll go to you since you brought
This
it up.
broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back with three of the state's top journalists, Brad Bumsted, John Micek, and Amy Worden. We got three of the four corners of the state covered anyway. We're doing the top stories of the week, Penn State sexual abuse scandal. Now we're going to turn to a second of the top five. Amy Worden, you get to mention it. Go ahead.
The election of Kathleen Kane, the first Democrat elected Attorney General, the first woman elected Attorney General in the state of Pennsylvania. That's a huge historic moment for the state. And I think she came out of nowhere, an assistant district attorney from Lackawanna County, who was not the favorite in the primary. She was running against an established former congressman, and she prevailed, funded her own primary campaign, and then things changed for her after that. The Democratic Party got behind her, but she won, and she won big against the Republican.
Led the ticket, actually, right, John Micek?
Yeah, outpolling Senator Bob Casey and President Barack Obama in many parts of the state. It's a really sort of interesting story with Mrs. Kane, who grew as a candidate between the primary and in the general election. Seemed kind of awkward, not sure of herself during the primary, and then between that victory over Patrick Murphy and the fall election in November, a really strong debate performance against David Freed, the Republican candidate, the Cumberland County District Attorney. I think everyone at this table will probably score that as a pretty big win for Mrs. Kane, and then going on to just romp in the general.
And no doubt about it, we were talking about this earlier, she made Penn State scandal an issue about how it was handled with then Attorney General Tom Corbett. It took a long time, the whole business of whether you should call a grand jury, but something else all of you cover, running against the old boys in Harrisburg. You've heard that before, but this time it worked.
Right.
Go ahead.
Actually, our current governor used that at one point.
Every governor.
Yeah, they did. But just to make a broader point here, to me it was the Democratic sweep in the November election of the row offices. And the idea that for the remaining 2 years of his first term, Governor Tom Corbett will have Kathleen Kane on one side and Auditor General-elect Eugene DePasquale on the other side, constantly looking at what he does, critiquing what he does. And if he is elected to a second term, he's going to have more of the same. And I think it's going to limit what Corbett can do and possibly change how he's viewed by the public.
So potentially, Amy, if she does what she says, and why wouldn't we believe that she's going to do what she says? We're looking at an investigation of the investigation, right?
Essentially.
And who knows? I mean, does anyone have a clue where that could go? No, short answer.
I have a clue that you could simply wind up with conflicting viewpoints of prosecutors, that it should have been handled this way, or he says no, it should have been handled this way, and sort of a he said, she said. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll find some major.
Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, a smoking gun. It doesn't mean that there's any,
that smoking gun. Yeah.
I mean, Governor Corbett's made sort of the baseline argument is that it was a W. The case was. I mean, a win. A win for the prosecution. Mr. Sandusky went away. He's going to go away for the rest of his life, convicted on 45 of 48 counts. The question is, as she begins looking into this, what wrongdoing, if any, does she find, or inconsistencies in the prosecution, and then what do you do with that result at the end of it? I mean, is there something prosecutable, or do you just wave your finger and make sort of political points out of it?
If it's a debate over, it took a long time, should you have had a grand jury? I mean, where does that argument ultimately get one? I mean, I don't know.
And I think it gets mixed up with Bonusgate and the whole prosecution of political figures during Corbett's tenure as Attorney General, including, some Republicans, but a lot of Democrats. And I think this may look at the resources that were afforded to that versus what there was for Penn State. And at one time, Deweese was saying...
John Micek, you give me the last word.
Just want to say, where I think it becomes problematic, depending on how long it draws out, it becomes potential fodder for Mr. Corbett's Democratic challenger in 2014.
Gubernatorial campaign, got it. All right, big story number 3 after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Welcome back to Big Stories of the Year. Story number 3. It's up to John Micek. Name story number 3.
Now, 2 adjuncts and sort of political process stories, but important nonetheless. The debate over Pennsylvania's voter identification law and the sort of concomitant debate over legislative redistricting. Again, sort of political process stories, but fundamentally important. We all talked about voter ID. That was the requirement. You had to show photo identification at the polls. Got stayed for this past election, but and there was overwhelming voter support for it, but the way it unfolded, the state's inability to get proper ID into the hands of people who needed it, it was a logistical mess for the Corbett administration, a political black eye, and it thrust Pennsylvania for about 2 or 3 weeks in what should have been a sleepy sort of late summer, early fall into national headlines. It was on cable news every night. It was lighting up the blogs. It was quite a tempest for a while there.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and the reason that put Pennsylvania in the national spotlight was the House Majority Leader, Mike Terzai, blurted out in a meeting of Republicans that he didn't know was being taped, that voter ID was something that was accomplished to hand Mitt Romney Pennsylvania in November, and that pretty much exploded in their face.
And something else that I think you wrote about, it had a reverse effect. It helped energize Democrats, right? I mean, particularly in the city of Philadelphia, where all of a sudden they came alive and viewed this as something called voter suppression. So where does it all stand now, Brad?
Well, actually, there's going to be at some point a full trial of the voter ID law by Judge Robert Simpson in Commonwealth Court.
In July, I think.
I'm not sure exactly when.
It is planned for next summer.
Yeah.
Next summer.
I mean, he had only ruled on the issue of an injunction, and the key issues that would be taken to trial will still be
So isn't the big
up.
issue whether it's constitutional or not?
Exactly
Yeah.
right. I mean, that's what the trial will focus on next summer.
And that's not been resolved.
It has not. The
Now, hold on a minute.
only court proceeding was an injunction sought by the American Civil Liberties Union and some other people saying that it had been rolled out incorrectly. That they
But I'm confused about something.
Go ahead.
We've got to wait another 6 months
Yeah.
to find out if the law's legal or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that make any?
Well,
go ahead.
we're pushing up against another election,
another
election.
albeit not.
Well, we have one in a
not
primary,
presidential.
or maybe it doesn't matter as much in a primary. So basically, then, Amy, I'll ask you
Primary
this:
status quo.
Yeah, that means you can vote. They'll ask you for what?
For your ID,
and if you don't have one,
vote anyway. Yeah.
and it will count.
Yep.
Right? So is there any possibility, anyone who wants to jump in here, any possibility that the legislature revisits this and says, maybe it's a bad idea, maybe we need to change some feature of it? Anybody?
Well, not till after Simpson rules on it.
You think there's
I mean,
no...
why would you have another track out there that could go to court while one's already in court?
Right.
I'm just thinking that wouldn't
I get it.
be efficient.
You all agree?
Yes.
All agree? All right, controversial to be sure. Now, if we take a look at redistricting, John, you brought this up for about a minute that we have left. Pretty much did what it wanted to do, which was to make Republican congressional districts safer.
It made congressional redistricting made the congressional districts safer. Legislative redistricting actually helped Democrats because they were running under 2001 maps, helped them pick up a couple of seats down in the Philadelphia suburbs. The congressional seats are settled. The legislative thing is still held up in state Supreme Court. No indication on when a ruling of that might come down. There's no rush, really. They're not going to need it until 2014. On the other hand, that would end up being a gigantic mess because the 5-member commission passed a map that they thought was okay. Critics, led by a piano teacher from Allentown called Amanda Holt, appealed to state Supreme Court. The Supreme Court kicked it back. They tried it again. They appealed, kicked it back in the Supreme Court. It ended up being just sort of an egg.
So before we get out of here, the point is we got congressional redistricting done. It helped Republicans. They didn't lose a single congressional seat, right? Now, the state legislative maps, House and Senate maps, are on hold, and we use the maps, the old maps from 2001, just so our viewers got this. Coming up, we got new maps, and we'll see if they hold up, right? We still have no ruling on that. Is that right, Amy?
We have revised maps before the Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court is tied Do I got that right?
3-3.
Three Republicans, 3 Democrats? Could we get a better scenario?
No. But I think that it is the undercurrent to this is the power of the Supreme Court was exercised in 2 key issues that we see in redistricting and voter ID.
All right. I think I got a handle on this. We've done, what, 3 issues? We're now down to issue number 4 after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to Newsmakers' Big Stories of the Year, and we're up to story number 4, and we're back to Brad Bumsted.
Got to go with the impact fee that was approved by the state legislature. There were calls for a tax on the Marcellus shale industry, a large tax, according to some Democrats. Governor Corbett tried to limit that. There were also key issues involved here, like statewide regulations for the industry. In the end, what happened is, and I'll quote my colleague, Mr. Micek here, is that the industry dodged a major bullet through this. It could have been a huge tax for them, and as it turned out, the impact fee is very small, but a big portion of this is still tied up in court.
Anybody want to comment?
That's tied up in Commonwealth Court, right, or State Supreme Court, rather, excuse me. After a 2-hour hearing in Pittsburgh this autumn, are statewide preemption of zoning rules. That was a huge win for the industry because they were dealing with a patchwork of rules and regulations from county to county or community to community. They wanted what they said was predictability in the law, so they knew what they could do from town to town. It was a huge usurpation of local control. So I think 7 municipalities from Brad's neck of the woods, Brad's papers rather, banded together to appeal it, and now it's tied up in court.
I will say there's more than a bit of irony here. And on the one hand, the impact fee was pushed through and promoted as something that was going to bring relief to counties most impacted by drilling, right? And then at the same time, they turned around and said, well, but you can't make your own rules about drilling to the municipalities. And thus we have the ongoing court battle.
So there's no severance tax, but local municipalities are getting something back from in terms of the taxes, right?
Sure. Well, actually, everybody is.
Everybody's getting back.
It's brought in about $204 million so far. There's a 60-40 split between the states, between the county and the state. And even those communities where there's not drilling, such as Allentown, for instance, got a small chunk.
Here's what we're going to do. Big story number 5. Everybody gets to pick one. All right, Amy Worden, pick your big story.
Well, I'm going to take a little different course here. I'd like to pitch the Pennsylvania citizen, non-elected, who had the most influence on Pennsylvania politics this year, and that's Amanda Holt, whom John referenced earlier, the piano teacher from Allentown who drew her own maps and for the state's legislative districts. And essentially, the Supreme Court took those maps and said, we like what she's done, and told the legislature, go back and do it again.
That is an amazing story, isn't it?
It's a fabulous story, and I think she immediately became the darling of the government reformers and the nemesis of the Republicans who crafted the map.
It shows you what you can do with a computer, John Micek, right?
You sit down with some census data, a slide rule, and bam.
Computer. You got one right there.
But what's amazing, though, is that this woman came up with working in her basement by herself, came up with a more consistent and constitutional map than an army of computer nerds sitting in the Capitol, and the Supreme Court said, you know what, she did it better.
Yeah, but she wanted to do it better because she was trying not to use politics as a way. All right, story number 2. Number 5, you get your pick.
5B, I guess.
5B, that's it.
I'm going to say now Pennsylvania now having its first 2 openly gay lawmakers, taking some stuttering steps into the 20th century for a state that generally fears change. On the one hand, you have Democrat Brian Sims from Philadelphia in the 182nd district, who defeated his one-time sort of boss, Babette Josephs, in a contested primary down there. And then earlier this month, in December, State Representative Mike Fleck, a Republican from Huntington County,
so we're bipartisan.
Speaking with his hometown newspaper, admitted it was something he had struggled with for a long time. In fact, was married and had children, and had finally sort of come out. big steps for a state this culturally conservative, I think.
Also from a rural area. I mean, you know,
Exactly.
it's typically maybe more urban. I don't want to be stereotypical here. All right, Brad, your big story.
I'll go with the conviction of former House Democratic Policy Chairman Steve Stetler, not because of who he was. In fact, he was the least likely, some believe, of leaders to be convicted, had a lot of support in the community, but only because his case ended a long progression of legislative leaders being convicted for using public resources for campaigns. So it was sort of the end of that whole era that began with charges against Mike Veon.
Yeah, but wasn't there at least one case where someone was found innocent with almost similar circumstances, or I got that wrong?
Clearly, there was in the very first trial, Sean Romali, a former state House member from Western Pennsylvania, was acquitted.
Okay. All right, we have a minute or so left. Looking forward to next year, we've got a myriad set of issues. Any chance the Pennsylvania legislature does medical marijuana? I'm going to go. John got us off into the progressive. John Micek, medical marijuana. 80% of the voters of the state say yes.
Not going to happen.
No, sir.
Not going to happen.
Amy Worden, let's go. Gay marriage.
No, gay
Does the
marriage.
state legislature do gay marriage?
Well, you know, maybe at least there'll be a debate, but unlikely.
Now, you know where I'm heading with this one. Gun control. Brad, that's something you know a lot about. You've written about it. Go ahead. Gun control. Any gun control measures passed?
I think that the issue has changed. I really do. I mean, I would have told you automatically without any question it won't happen, but I think some small, reasonable thing may be done, maybe a token.
Yeah.
But I think that the public is demanding something, and I think it just feels different to me than it has in 25 years.
Any of you, John?
I agree. I mean, I think you know, everyone sort of, it's a cliche to call something a tipping point, but insofar as the tragedy in Newtown was one where you're talking about so many children and such carnage, I think now in public mindset, even in Pennsylvania where gun rights are so embedded, I think now we are at a pivot point where the debate is turned.
Yeah. Now, you've talked with Governor Corbett, I know, and I've had him on the program last week. Assault weapon bans, he thinks that's a federal government thing. Have you anything different that you've picked up, or you think assault weapon ban is not likely to happen?
Well, I think he's pushed it off on the federal government, saying that only the federal government can make laws about assault weapons. However, I haven't really looked into it, but clearly my states have different gun laws in general, as do municipalities. So, you know, it would seem that Pennsylvania would be within its rights to have one.
All right, great update. We got through. We did 5 A, B, and C.
Yep.
See you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.